Hello, welcome. This is a recording of an online class that I have previously given on the topic of this Fiore Sword in Two Hands, the Largo plays. I did not record it at the time that I initially presented it, but now I'm going back and recording some of these classes that I still had the slides and videos for so that I can share it with a wider audience. I'm Master Lloyd Aldrith from the SCA. There are my websites and my email address. Quick background, Fiore was published in 1409 or thereabouts. It is the earliest known complete European combat system. There are previous publications that were just sword or other single systems, but Fiore's manual includes wrestling, dagger, swords, armored combats, pikes, spears, and mounted combat. 4 copies are known to survive. The one held by the Getty Museum in California is the most complete. Each of them is different since this is pre-printing press, so different art and slightly different text and slightly different pages that survive to modern time. The page numbering uses a museum style page numbering where each sheet of paper or vellum is numbered. The front of each sheet is called recto or an abbreviated R, and the back of each sheet is called verso or abbreviated V. On each of these plates, the master is indicated with a gold cornet or crown, and he's used to introduce a new concept. And then a scholar or a student is indicated by a gold garter. In both cases, the person wearing the gold is the person that is active, that is winning the particular play, but the scholar is doing more of a variation on the master's initial concept. So my sources, the plates are zoomed in and cropped from the very high resolution pictures available from the Getty Museum itself at that link. And the translations are by Colin Hatcher from his book, The Flower of Battle, which is also available on Wikton Hour at the link there. This presentation, these slides can be downloaded from learnfiore.org at that link. And the link to this YouTube video will also be provided there, although I guess you're already watching the video. And we have low-res videos on the slides for real-time sharing. So onto this particular section. Fiore's Sword in Two Hands has 2 sections. It has a long-range section, the Zogo Largo plays. There are 20 plates, and they're in the Getty on pages 25 through 27. And then the short-range plays are 23 plates on pages 27 to 30. This talk will talk only about the long-range plays. I'm going to give you a very simplified definition, which is close but not perfect. Short or close range is when grappling is possible, and long range is when grappling is not possible. So, and as I said, a master will introduce a situation and the student plays are variations or alternates. So here's the introduction to the Sword in Two Hands. And he says, I am the sword, deadly against all weapons. Neither spear nor poleaxe nor dagger can prevail against me. I can be used at long range or close range, or I can be held in the half sword grip and moved to the narrow game. I can be used to take away the opponent's sword or move to grapple. My skill lies in breaking and binding. I am also skilled in covering and striking, with which I seek always to finish the fight. I will crush anyone who opposes me. I am of royal blood. I dispense justice, advance the cause of good, and destroy evil. To those who learn my crossings, I will grant great fame and renown in the art of armed fighting. Does that get the blood pumping? Ready to do some sword fighting? So the first play is called the First Remedy Master. Here begins the wide play of the sword in two hands. The master here is depicted with the cornet. He's on the left. The gold leaf is used to emphasize him. This master who is crossed at the point of the sword with the player says, when I am crossed at the points, I quickly switch my sword to the other side and strike him from that side with a downward blow to his head or his arms. Alternatively, I can place a thrust into his face, as the next picture will show. So he doesn't explicitly make this suggestion, but some of the interpretations do, and I agree with them, that which choice you make, whether you immediately thrust or whether you do effectively a disengage and a thrust, depends on whether you are winning the bind or losing the bind, where the force is. So if you are pushing against the other person's sword and you have the advantage, you have access, the line where the crossing is allows you access to his body and his face, then you can thrust. If you were losing the bind, so that if you were to immediately cut or stab, you would miss, then you have to disengage in order to get ahead of his body. So here's our take on both options, I believe. So there was a disengage and with a thrust and then a cut. And then here's the version with the initial thrust. I have placed a thrust into his face, as the previous master said. Also, I could have done what he told you, that is, when my sword was crossed on the right, I could have quickly switched sides to the left, striking his head or arms with a downward blow. So here it is. I'm winning the cross. I'm on the left with the hat. This is during COVID. So we're not armored. We're doing slow work. I'm wearing shorts and a sun hat, but that's my stand-in for a cornet. You can see that because I'm winning the bind, I have easy access to his hand or his face. Plate 3 is the second remedy master. So we're back to the master wearing cornet. I too am crossed in the wide play, but this time at the middle of the swords. And immediately after making my cross, I will let my sword drop down to slide forwards and backwards over his hands. Or if I choose to pass forward with my right foot and move offline, I will then make a thrust into your chest, as you will see drawn next. To me, this sounds like he's doing effectively a strong beat, but a single time beat, which means he's just making contact with the sword, applying pressure in order to maintain his line, and then either sliding forward to the hands or making a passing step to thrust into his opponent. So here I am again on the left with my floppy hat instead of a cornet, and I'll show you this play. So I can cut. Here you see completing the play of my teacher. I have made his cover, and then immediately I do what he said. That is, I strike first to my opponent's hands, then I continue with a thrust to his chest. And if you compare the two pictures, you can see that the student has done a passing step. His feet have reversed. He's stepped into it in order to deliver this thrust. And here's me following through and doing that. In my case, I rotated my sword 90 degrees in order to give me more authority in my push so that he cannot resist it and push me out of the way. Lines up the swords with my muscles much better. It's not clear whether Fiore would have done this or not. The artistic techniques used in the illustrations are occasionally less than ideal, because he feels they need to draw the quillions in order to depict the sword, and there are a couple places where it doesn't make sense that you would be hitting someone with a flat rather than the thrust, rather than the edge. So in this case, I think you could do it either way. I chose to rotate in order to get a little more authority on my thrust. All right, plate 5 is the second student. Here, my master previously instructed me that when I am crossed at mid-swords with my opponent, I should immediately advance forward and seize his sword as shown, and then strike him with a cut or thrust. Also, I could destroy his leg, as you see drawn next, by stomping with my foot against the side of his knee or under his kneecap. There's a picture of us doing this play in a class, in an in-person class, and then I'll show you a video of us doing this play. So we're crossed. I step forward, grab the end of his sword, push it out of the way, and then I can do whatever I want. I will show it to you again because it's pretty quick. If you were doing this with sharp swords, you want to make sure that most of your grab is against the flat of the sword, but you can get pretty good authority there without too much risk of slicing your hand open. depending on how quick a reaction your opponent gives you. All right, plate 6 shows the kick that he talked about earlier. As the previous student told you, and I quote it down here, our master taught us this technique. Here I show you how it is done, and as you can see, my opponent can do nothing to stop me. So the previous plate had the description, I could destroy his leg by stomping with my foot against the side of his knee or under the kneecap. So here is our attempt doing this. Show it to you one more time. So I take my very period sandals and kick him in the knee in order to, it could have been shin, it could have been the back of the knee. It all depends on the alignment and where we are. All right, plate 7, the 4th student, also called the peasant's blow or strike. This is one of my favorites. I love teaching this play. And you can see a picture of us doing it in an in-person class there. This play is named the peasant strike, and you do it like this. Take a narrow stance with your left foot forward and wait for the peasant to attack first with his sword. When he launches his attack, immediately advance your left foot to the left of the line and step diagonally offline to the left with your right foot, receiving his strike in the middle of your sword. Now let his sword slide off yours to the ground and then quickly counterattack with a downward strike to his head or arms, or a thrust into his chest, as you will see drawn in the next picture. This is also a good play if you are fighting sword versus poleaxe or against a heavy or light staff. So effectively, what you are doing here is you're letting him initiate an overhand cut, and then you interrupt that. You step into it, you deflect the blow, and then after his sword goes still with the high energy he started with, sliding past you, you then have your option of doing a variety of different mean things to him while your sword is free. This, by the way, does work in an SCA context, both cut and thrust and armored, and I have used it in tournaments. So here is the play. We're doing it nice and slow. I'll show it to you one more time. Now, Fiore doesn't say this, but if you were in a real fight and not an SCA context, you could also strike your opponent with your pommel or your quillions, because those are available and are near his face at the time after you release the sword. So in a number of places, Fiore gives you a counter to his cool plays, and in this case, he gives you a counter and a counter to the counter. And the master is wearing a really cool hat, the bird and wings on it. It's really kind of cool. In the previous drawing, you saw the peasant strike, in which you saw a thrust well placed into the opponent's chest. Well, I did a cut, but you had many options. And alternatively, he could have struck a downward blow to the opponent's head or arms, as I explained previously. That's what I did. Also, if the opponent seeks to counter me by striking back up with a rising blow to my arms from the left, I quickly advance my left foot and place my sword over his, and from this position, he can do nothing to me. So we'll show you both the counter and the counter to the counter. So the idea here with the counter is as soon as the master, the person who's doing the slick move, releases in order to do his own attack, the initial attacker may now, his sword is free, and he may do a back cut with the false edge, the back edge of his sword, and while the master is distracted and swinging his sword around in space in order to do his fancy cut on the back of the head, and then the response is just to maintain that cover. So here's the reaction. He's not going quite all the way to the ground in this case. And then there was the counter where I maintained the cover rather than just letting it go past, at which point I can then do whatever I want, and he's going to have a hard time generating any energy to hurt me when I release. So I'll show it to you one more time. Here's the counter. He's using the true edge. He could use the false edge. And then here's the counter where I maintain the cover and then cut his head off. All right, plate 9. If your opponent strikes to your leg, withdraw your front foot, or pass backwards and strike downward to his head, as shown in the drawing. With a two-handed sword, it is unwise to strike to the knee or below because it is too dangerous for the one striking. If you attack your opponent's leg, you leave yourself completely uncovered. Now, if you have fallen to the ground, then it is all right to strike at your opponent's legs, but otherwise it is not a good idea, as you should generally oppose his sword with your sword. I hope that makes a lot of sense. We do this in SCA fencing. I teach this. If someone is striking at your leg, it's probably best not to parry it, but to remove the leg from range by stepping that foot back. And then you have your sword is still available to strike his completely undefended torso and head. And that's what he's saying here. Here's a low-res recording of us doing this play. So he strikes at my leg. I void, I step out a little bit, and then I strike him in the head to show him the foolishness of his ways. All right. Plate 10, seventh student encounter. I would make a pitch that you do not have a complete medieval combat system if you do not have a groin kick in the system. So here it is in Fiore's system. Um, Obviously, this is not SCA legal. Please do not do this. But it's here in the manual and it makes sense for a real combat system. This play, where I strike you with a kick to the groin, is made to hurt you so much that your cover will falter. When you make this play, you should do it quickly to prevent your opponent from being able to counter it. The counter to this play must be done quickly, and it is made by the player grabbing the student's right leg with his left hand and then throwing him to the ground. So here is the kick. Okay. And here is the counter to the kick. I'll show it one more time. Kick. And then reset and the counter to the kick. And me trying to survive before I go down on the ground. Plate 11 is the 8th student, and it's called the exchange of points or thrusts. I've heard both, and different translations will use either word. So I list both in order to not confuse people if they're looking at other interpretations. And this is actually a play that we use a lot in SCA fencing. It's very common and it makes a lot of sense. This play is called the exchange of points, and it is done like this. When your opponent thrusts at you, quickly advance your front foot, off the line, and with the other foot, step to the side, also moving off the line, crossing your sword with your hands low and your point high to his face or chest, as you see drawn here. All right, and so here is the play. I'm doing the play. I'm the one on the right with the hat. He thrusts. I step offline, apply pressure to his sword, slide up it into a thrust to whatever part of his body I want to do. Step offline and thrust up. Play 12 is the 9th student. It's played from page 26. This play comes from the exchange of points that came before me. If you make the thrust and your opponent fails to immediately position his point either in your face or in your chest, perhaps because you are in armor, then you should quickly pass forward with your left foot, seize his sword as shown here, then strike him hard with your sword since you have his sword gripped and he cannot escape. Now this figure is a little hard to tell where the swords lay on top of each other, how they're positioned. You can't see behind the hands there. And it looks like the student who's on the left, like his sword is in fact trapped behind his own arm. So it took us a little bit to think about this. We may not have gotten it right, but this is our interpretation. of this play. And you can go out and try it and see if this makes sense to you or if there's something else that's going on. Okay. So all he's doing is stepping in to grab my guard in an open spot where I don't have it grabbed, kind of between my hands. Now he's safe and he can attack me with his sword that he still has in one hand. You'll note that in this case his sword is free on the outside, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But we may not have that quite right. The figure is a little ambiguous. Plate 13 is the 10th student and it's called Breaking the Thrust. This is another defense you can make against the thrust. When someone thrusts at you, it's described in the exchange of thrusts discussion a couple of two plays before me. Then you must advance and step off the line. You should do the same thing in this play, except that in the exchange of points, you thrust back with your hands low and your point high, as I explained earlier. But in this play, which is called breaking the thrust, you proceed with your hands high and you advance and step off the line. And as you advance and step off the line, you strike downwards, crossing the opponent's thrust at mid-sword and driving it to the ground. Then you quickly close to grapple. So this is a variation. I think the earlier reference to exchange of thrusts and exchange of points are the same play, just different words used, which is why I used both words previously when we were talking about it. But this is called breaking the thrust. Here's our take on this. And it's just a sweep and then a rising cut. Plate 14, the 11th student. The student who preceded me beat his opponent's sword to the ground. Now I'm going to complete his play as follows. After I beat my opponent's sword to the ground, I will stomp it with my right foot. This will either break it or prevent him from being able to lift it. But wait, there's more. As soon as I have pinned his sword to the ground with my foot, I strike him with the false edge of my sword under his beard or into his neck, and then immediately I return with a downward strike of my sword to his arms or hands, as you've seen drawn here. So I already did a cut in the previous video, but so we won't show it to you again here, but that was his description of it. So plate 15, the 12th student. Here's another drawing of the breaking the thrust play that you saw first two drawings previously. After I've beaten his sword to the ground, I quickly pin it to the ground with my right foot and then strike him in the head, as you've seen shown here. So here are those two figures, and here's me doing the play again. So I step on it, I do a rising shot, and a falling shot. And there's nothing he can do to stop me other than perhaps let go of his sword and run away. All right, whoops, I'm sorry. I'm going to play that one more time for you. Thrust, bind, step, rising cut, falling cut. Almost all of that is SCA legal. The step on the sword is not, but I don't think it's actually all that critical. You could do the rest of it and it should still work. Plate 16, the 13th student. This is another play that flows from the breaking of the thrust play. After I break his thrust, if he raises his sword to cover as I strike upwards, I quickly drop the hilt of my sword inside his right arm near his right hand. Then I grab my blade near the point with my left hand and then strike him in the face. Or alternatively, if I choose, I could drive my sword edge into his neck, slicing him across the throat. All right. This has a fair bit of grappling in it. Probably not SCA legal without some heavy adaptation, but here's the play. So I do the same bind. He tries to cover, and I close up, and I can punch him or cut him however I wanted. So, all right. Plate 17, the 14th student. Also After I have beaten aside or crossed my opponent's sword, I can press my left hand to his right elbow and push strongly. This will turn him and leave him unprotected, after which I can strike him. We're going to show these two together. The student who preceded me spoke truly when he told you that he could turn the opponent and cut to his head. In addition, before you could turn back to make cover, I would give you a major wound to your back with the point of my sword. So there are the two plates on the left that we're playing here, and then here is the play. All right, I will play it one more time. He tries to cover, I close, I turn him, and then I strike him from the back however I want. You could arguably make that SCA legal. We would have to limit the grappling quite a bit. But I didn't actually push him very much. I just kind of formed a wall and pivoted. So this could be done if you were careful in some of the SCA rule sets. Plate 19 is the 18th student. It's called the false thrust. This play is called the false point or the short point or the false thrust. I've seen translations for all three, and I will explain how to do it. I make it look like I'm making a powerful attack against my opponent with a crosswise strike to his head. As he makes cover, I strike his sword, but only lightly. Then I quickly turn my sword to the other side of his blade, gripping my sword with my left hand at about mid-sword. From there, I can quickly make a thrust into his throat or chest. This play is, however, better in armor than without armor. All right, so this is a high energy cut or pretend high energy cut, a disengage, and a thrust or cut. So the trick here is you're trying to get him to do a strong parry that takes him out of the way. This is a completely SCA legal and should work very nicely. Plate 20 is the counter to the 16th student. This play is the counter to the previous play, the false point or the short point. And this counter is made as follows. When the student strikes my sword lightly and then turns his sword around to the other side, I turn my sword around in exactly the same way, stepping sideways to the left as I do so to gain his unprotected side. From here, I can make a thrust to his face. And this counter is good both with and without armor. So here's the play. We've moved a little bit around. I make the cut. And as I move around to get to his back, he rotates, does the same thing, but stabs me before I can stab him. Play it one more time. Beat. I come around and run myself into his sword. So this is the conclusion of the Largo section. Here ends the wide play of the sword in two hands, made up of plays that are all connected to each other, including remedies and counters from both the right and left sides, and counter thrusts and counter cuts to each situation, with breaks, covers, strikes, and locks, all things that can be easily understood. I hope you enjoyed that. So here's our bibliography. The manual itself, I have three different versions that I kind of like. The first one is just a facsimile of the original book in the original Italian, handwritten medieval Italian. The second version is Collins Hatcher's and Tracy Mello's translation, where what they've taken is a facsimile of the original Getty manual, but they've removed all the handwritten medieval Italian and replaced it with typewritten English. So when you read it, it's almost like you're reading the original manual, but it's understandable if you don't understand medieval Italian. And then the third version is from Freelance Academy Press. It's nice in that it has both a facsimile of the page, and then on the facing page, it has a typed text in medieval Italian and then a typed translation. So you have the best of all three worlds. You can read what was said, you can see the original, and you can see the translation. It is, however, a different translation. It's not Colin Hatcher's translation. So a little slight variation in some of the interpretations, which is a good thing to get a different points of view on how the text was translated. And then there are a lot of interpretations out there, which are in some ways similar to this video, where they've taken the text or the plates, and then they show pictures and of themselves doing it and explain the plays. We did a lot of work for years with Bob Charette's Mazzari book, which is wonderful. More recently, Guy Windsor has published a series of books on different sections, and then a newer book on longsword techniques as well. Our study group has a page called at learnfiore.org, and we have a YouTube channel that you can get at now with a shorter handle, youtube.com/@learnfiore. And we'll get you there as well. So that concludes my class. Hope you enjoyed it, and please check back and watch some other videos on other portions of the Fiore's system.